Good morning everyone. I'm Perpinian Mike Arthur and I am the one who discuss about the introduction of Unit 1 Inclusive Education. So we start. Inclusive education refers to a wide range of strategies that seek to make a universal right to quality, relevant, and appropriate education. Yes, this is true. The right of inclusive education is in a variety of techniques aimed at making education a universal right to equality and relevant and suitable for all. Inclusive education acknowledges that learning begins at birth and continues throughout life and includes learning in the home, the community, and informal, and non-formal situation. Children learning begin at home. Therefore, the second sitting learning of the children is in the school that we call formal or either outside of the classroom that we call non-formal education. It is with the help of education that the youth can choose and seek their interests. They choose their ways and directions of their lives. With this, they set goals for themselves and strive to achieve them. Education propels the youth in the right, and the non-formal inclusive education refers to the structured educational programs which take place outside the formal education classroom setting to develop the skill of the learners, whereas informal education refers to unstructured education. Inclusive education seeks to enable community system and structure in all cultures and contexts to combat discrimination, celebrate diversity, promote participation, and overcome barriers to learning and participation for all. Inclusive education, it ensures the participation of all students in quality education, both in school and community settings, including resource-poor or crisis-affected settings. Inclusive education is a part of a wider strategy promoting inclusive development with the goal of creating a world where there is peace, tolerance, sustainable use of resources, social justice, and where the basic needs and rights of all are met. Yes, it is simple means that inclusive education is a broader approach for inclusive development with sustainable resource usage, social justice, and the fulfillment of everyone's basic needs and rights. Inclusive education refers to a universal right to be educated anytime and anywhere with the purpose of combating discrimination, celebrating diversity, and creating a world of peace and tolerance. Inclusive education, there is no judgment for all. It accepts all of the negative aspects of every student, and it will good to know that all settings of inclusive education is everywhere wherein the unity are active. UNESCO's definition. Inclusion is seen as a process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning, cultures, and communities, and reducing exclusion within and from education. Simply means inclusion promotes quality and equitable education for all without exclusion, including those who may be potentially marginalized by learning need or social position. An educationally inclusive school is one which the teaching and learning, achievements, attitude, and well-being of every young person matters. Effective schools are educationally inclusive schools. This is what the inclusive education important goal, and this is what inclusive education called fair and square all of every student. So our next game is true or false. Inclusive education is another name of special education. Yes, this is true because inclusive education, also called inclusion, is education that includes everyone with non-disabled and disabled person, including those with special education needs, learning together in mainstream schools, colleges, and universities. Next is inclusive education concepts have much more in common with the concept that underpin education for all, or EFA. This is true. Next is education. Inclusive education is a shift from being preoccupied with a particular group to a focus on overcoming barriers to learning and participation. So this is true. All differences are acknowledged and respected any inclusive education except health status and disability. This is false. Inclusive education is for all. Inclusive education is about changing the student to fit the system, not changing system to fit the student. False. Because the system of inclusive education is focused for all the student, system of inclusive education is must adjust to the student. Our next game is inclusive education or not. First is assumes that there is a separate group of children who have special education needs. So this is inclusive education. Next is brings the children with disabilities into a four mainstream school and must be ready for integration rather than the school being made ready. This is inclusive education. Special classrooms or buildings that are attached to mainstream school for special education needs with special teacher. This is inclusive education. Last is bringing an issue from the margins into the mainstream, getting this disability issue mainstream in the EFA and school improvement debates and process. This is not inclusive education. Next is why inclusive education. All children may be part of their community, acquire a feeling of belonging, and be better equipped for life as children and adults in the community. It provides more learning chances. Education is a basic human rights. Yes, according to the Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, states that everyone has a right to education and that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Next is World Declaration on Education for All, or Education for All is a policy signed by 155 nations and 150 donors or NGO. According to World Declaration on Education for All, the learning needs of the disabled command special attention. Steps need to be taken to provide equal access to education to every category of disabled person as an integral part of the education system, or UNESCO in 1990, para 29. The ultimate goal affirmed by the World Declaration on Education for All is to meet the basic learning needs of all children, youth, and adults. The long-term effort to attain that goal can be maintained more effectively if intermediate goals are established and progress toward these goals is measured. Next is poverty reduction and development. Inclusive education growth creates quality jobs, provides opportunity for all members of society, particularly the most disadvantaged, and more evenly shares the benefits of wealth. Next is better achievement and confidence. One of the inclusive education achievement is inclusive education happens primarily through accepting, understanding, and attending to student differences and diversity, which can include physical or cognitive, academic, social, and emotional. Next is where does inclusive education come from? In the late 1980s, the term inclusive education first appeared in the scholarly literature. As an alternative to special education, inclusive education broadened the duties of schools and youth school system in order to provide access, participation, and learning opportunities for kids from underserved communities. And the next discussant is Jekyll V. Nalda.